you and I do need to figure out who is the authentic us that God made. We do need leaders with character. That's not like we have to pick either or of these. But do you understand? Here's what I'm trying to paint, because this is why they're mind games. In the end, they're a new code, and they are using Jesus. Do you see that? You're not coming to Jesus and saying, Jesus, here's my life. They're saying, Jesus, here's what I want. So let me give you 2 mind games that we play today. They're attempts to add something else to the essence of Christianity. I referenced it a few weeks ago, but a biblical scholar by the name of Wesley Huff was on the Joe Rogan podcast. Joe Rogan's the #1 podcast in the world. I don't recommend you listen to it. His language is quite salty, but Wesley Huff went on and did a beautiful job explaining the Christian faith. It was a brilliant conversation. But in the conversation, he quoted a friend of his as a Christian leader in the United Kingdom named Andy Bannister, and this is what he said. If you take Christ out of Christian, all you're left with is Ian. And Ian's a great guy, but he's not going to save you from your sins. So we're gonna explore a couple of the Ians, if you will. 2 mind games that we wrestle with today. And I'm going to be a little provocative on purpose. Now, I just want to warn you, I am an equal opportunity offender. So if you're not offended on the first one, you will likely be offended on the second one. But I'm just keeping it real for everybody in the room, okay? So a little provocative on purpose. Here's the mind game, the first mind game that we are embracing as a culture, and then often in times inside the church, is I'm going to call it the search for authenticity. The search for authenticity. I know that doesn't sound provocative. A thinker, Charles Taylor, he's a Catholic. He's Canadian. He has studied very, very deeply the history of thought in the world. He's written 2 or 3 books that I don't recommend because they're huge and difficult to wade through. But he's a very, very thoughtful person. You can get summaries of some of his books. He's a Christian. Like I said, he's a Catholic. And here's what he's observed in his study of human history. He said, for all of human history, when you wanted to figure out who it is that you are, you wanted to say, who am I? Who do I think that I am? Which we're going to talk about for the next several weeks. That for all of human history, up until very, very recently, that was given to you. Your family would tell you who you were. Your country would tell you who you were. Your tribe would tell you you're Greek. You're Roman. You're British. You're Indian. You're Mexican. You're American. And your identity was handed to you. And you would, in most cases, just say, okay, well, I guess that's who I am. My father is a tradesman, so I'm going to be a tradesman. My father is a banker. I'm going to be a banker. Versus, here's what he says. He says, versus now, we're the first generation in human history who has decided to say, you know what? I don't think we want to do that anymore. I get to decide who I am. And who are you to tell me who it is that I am? I get to define my own identity. And so we have phrases like this. If anybody, you've heard these phrases before, people will say, you know, I'm just searching for my authentic self. Or I finally have found my authentic self and I'm expressing my truth. And here's what Charles Taylor says. He says, the result is that now we live in a culture where everyone is desperate and needs constant affirmation for their identity. And we now have the most fragile identities in the world. People they define themselves, but they're never sure if it's solid. Tim Keller, one of my heroes, he quoted this person who was a pastor in New York City, passed away a couple of years ago. He was familiar with a gentleman in the city who lived in Brooklyn, New York, who was an intellectual, not a Christian, not a person of faith in any way, very progressive-minded person. And he was quoting him, and I wanted to read this to you because you need to see this. And this guy named Freddie DeBoer, and he wrote this blog post called "You Can't Fake It." He's talking about this exact subject. Here's what he says. I've been increasingly preoccupied by a basic question. Why is everybody such a wreck? We have this vast intellectual architecture telling us that physical attractiveness hierarchies are cruel, gendered, and unfair, and that's correct. But we still obsess about being hot. And we judge each other about it, and all our papers and humanities seminars are entirely inadequate to ending that condition. We've got political critique of the ways in which notions of human worth are dictated by traditional inequalities of race and sex and class. And we have a set of political concepts like self-care that are designed to fight the negative effects of all that. We've got a self-help culture that constantly recounts to us and reminds us that we're beautiful, that every one of us is a ray of brilliant, unique light that alone can shine the way into a dark world. We've got a woke world of marketing that sells products by selling you to yourself, like the ad I just saw the other day. Join our gym. Join the body acceptance movement. We've got our social media tools to craft perfect, idealized versions of ourselves, curated to the millimeter so that we can present exactly what we want to present with digital precision. And guess what? None of this is working. I see people here in Brooklyn who are the most outwardly secure and confident people, who never betray a hint of doubt or guilt or remorse, who project cool at all times, who are popular, getting plaudits and positive affirmation at all times, but whose flow of life reveals that inside they still hate themselves. None of that stuff matters. None of it can get to the core of inadequacy that we feel inside. And I've begun to wonder, is this the human condition? Well, what happens when we say, I need to find my authentic self, and authenticity then becomes the code, is here's what happens. Because remember, we take Jesus and we make Jesus into an accessory. We say then Jesus must be the authenticator of my true self. Jesus must want me to be my best self. And if anybody ever tells me that Jesus or the church or the teaching of the Bible is against the best self version of me, then we say, well, Jesus would never ask me to go against my authentic self. Therefore, Christianity has to support my journey or it's wrong. I'm not trying to say that people don't struggle to find their identity. We're going to, again, do a whole sermon series on it because it's a crucial question. I am saying, though, that this has, in many people's minds, become the code. It's now authenticity, and what happens is people then use Jesus to support the code. Here's how Matt Brown, who's a counselor, says it. Authenticity is one of those words our culture loves to use, but rarely defines, like vibes, community, healthy boundaries. We're told to be authentic, but which version of ourselves are we supposed to offer? The one who gets overwhelmed by group texts, snaps in traffic, smiles through the church lobby while silently struggling inside? It's a mind game. Second mind game, I'm going to call it this. I'm going to call it Christian dominance. Christian dominance. A lot of definitions floating around. Here's the idea behind it. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and because it is, and we live in morally dangerous times, what needs to take place is the Christians need to rise up, and the Christians need to take over, and we need to put Christians in positions of power, and we ought to do whatever it takes to become the leaders, because the Christians are the people who should be at the helm of society and driving the choices and decisions and politics of our country, because that's what we were in the first place. And if we don't do that, if we don't engage in grabbing the reins of power, a godless agenda will take over and we'll be done. And so there's all this moral war language that gets used. Now, I promised you I was an equal opportunity offender, so here's what happens. When that kind of dominance becomes the code, Jesus becomes the supporter of that code. Think about this with me for a second, though. That's actually, what's actually being argued for in that is a leadership decision. People are trying to say Christians should be the ones leading, but a Christian may mean well about any given segment of society, but that does not mean that that Christian has the skill to lead in that organizational structure well. When I go to surgery, I would love it if the doctor was a Christian, but honestly, I'm more interested in the most skilled doctor. Are you not? Right? You pick a doctor very skilled, not a Christian, doctor, but a Christian. Which one you going to, right? And so here's what happens when we engage in this mind game about Christian dominance is we engage in rank hypocrisy. Because what happens is once we find the leader that we think should be in place, then what we do is we baptize all of their actions. Oh, well, we finally got our person. Let's overlook all their hypocrisy. Let's overlook their track record. They're our person. We have to be in charge. It has to work this way. And so we have phrases like, well, we're picking a politician, not a pastor. In other words, well, let's just overlook that stuff. You'd never apply that principle to anything else. You'd never go, well, we're picking a mechanic for our car, not a pastor. Oh, we're picking an accountant, not a pastor. Oh, we picked a principal for our school. We're not for our kids' school. We don't need a pastor. In other words, we'll overlook things in that person's character. We'd never do that. So we engage in rank hypocrisy. Have I offended everybody in the room? Is everyone feeling good? Now, both of those actually have some validity, don't they? I mean, you and I do need to figure out who is the authentic us that God made. We do need leaders with character. It's not like we have to pick either or of these. But do you understand? Here's what I'm trying to paint, because this is why they're mind games. In the end, they're a new code, and they are using Jesus. Do you see that? They're not coming to Jesus and saying, Jesus, here's my life. They're saying, Jesus, here's what I want. And one of them is using Jesus to get a self, and the other is using Jesus to get a state. Like, I need the government to look like this. I need me to look like this. I think it's like this. A lot of people who say they are Christians are really just moralists in the direction they think morality should go. And neither are actually at the heart about Jesus. It's something else at the heart of Christianity. Authenticity is the faith, or dominancianity is the faith. And because if you listen to the people who are in deep into those mind games talking, they rarely mention Jesus. Both are usually driven by fear. On this side, it's your fear, you and your fear of not being accepted and validated. And over here, it's you and your fear of the wrong people having control over you. Legitimate fears, but fears. Now, if you want to know if you are in the grip of one of these mind games, here's how you know. If, as I was talking, you found yourself trying to defend one of those, or if at lunch today, you lean over to someone and you say, well, let me tell you what he doesn't understand about that. At that moment, you'll know. Mind games of a moment, you're forced to pick one. Here's what Paul's saying. Pick Jesus instead.